What's your name and age?
My name is Gary Phillips, and I am 73 years old, born in 1950.
So, Gary, tell me about your family history. How'd they get into logging?
Oh, my dad actually was born in Sandpoint, Idaho, and his family he was born in 1920. His family left the Midwest just because of the Dust Bowl,
Hmm.
and they lived for a few years in Sandpoint, and then they moved to Squim. And my 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 dad's parents were very poor, and from my impression, his father wasn't much of a worker. And so my dad, when he was 10, went to work or went to live with another family, and they didn't have any kids. And he milked cows and helped them on the farm um, while he was going to school. And he went to grade school in Carlsberg and high school in Squim. And then when he was 15 years old, he bought his first truck, and it was a 1934, I believe, Ford single axle. And he had a job hauling pea silage and hay with it. He was still going to school. And later on, he converted it to a log truck. And I don't really know too much about his history after that. He was in World War II, where he was primarily a truck driver. And when he came out of the war, he actually somehow met my mom, who lived on the Duckabush, and and then ended up working for my uncle Irvin. And just a short story about what they did is Irvin had bought some timber out on the south side of Black Point, up on top of those sand bluffs. And Irvin had an old cat, and they took a boat that was derelict out of Pleasant Harbor, and they put the engine and the rudder on two big cedar logs and built it like a donkey sled, and that was their tug to tow their logs around. And they'd push them off of those bluffs, and they'd roll down the hill, and at high tide they'd tow them around to Pleasant Harbor and sell them. And then after that, he ran yarder for a while, and I think he bought his first truck after the war in about 48, maybe 49. It was a GMC, had a 671 Jimmy in it. And then after that, he bought a 55 Kenworth from Sandburg in Port Angeles. And then he took that truck, some of the components, he upgraded the engine in it and did some stuff. And then he built a kit, bought a kit from Kenworth. I think it was a 65 or 66 kit. And it took him about 2 years to put it all together and get those components out of the old truck into the new one. And then after that, he was able to buy new trucks and continue on hauling logs. And he hauled for Buck Mountain and everybody, Erling East Guard, all those guys for over the years.
Wow. So, your dad's log hauling, did he primarily work like in that Brinnon area for the better part of his beginning of his career?
Yes, he did. He went out to Forks a little bit and hauled out there, and until we started logging, and he followed us, he primarily hauled on the Canal and then sometimes out in Forks some, but didn't really go much beyond that. Didn't go to the Cascades or hardly ever down in Aberdeen or anything like that.
Sure. And what year would that have been where you were telling the story about Irvin mounting that motor and the rudder to that boat?
I think it was like 40, 45, 46, somewhere in there. I
Sure.
think it was right after World War II.
Do you remember how long Irvin logged for?
Irvin logged his whole life.
Okay.
He didn't go into service. He had an exemption because of the logging that they needed done during the war, and so he stayed. in the Brinnon area during the war, and just kept producing logs.
And you'd talked a bit before we actually got to interviewing about your Uncle Art. Do you have some history on him?
Yeah, I do. You want to go to the Kelly side now?
Sure.
Okay. Kate. The Kellys came from Ireland, and my grandfather, uh, he left home in Nova Scotia and went to Maine. I think he was 18 or 19 years old, and he logged in Maine for a few years, and then he went to Wisconsin, and he just kind of tramp logged his way across the United States, and ended up, he had an uncle in Woodinville, and they logged around there, and I think he even logged on his own. I think he had horses there, and then he came to the Canal, I think, in 1913, and logged with horses and steam yarders, and they bought the place on the Duckabush, just north of the Duckabush Road, in 1915, and then he logged. As far as I know, he logged. The furthest I've known of him logging was about to the Hamma Hamma,
Okay.
and the rest was probably in the Dosey Wallops Duckabush era. And he had a steam yarder, and he also had a small yarder with that just had a capstan on it. Skagit made one that was real small, and I think they used that up the river, and they would just maybe they used a horse for a haulback, and just pull the line up the hill and pull it down into the river, and then they would splash the river and push it all out to the bay, and then I think they rafted everything in Pleasant Harbor.
Wow. Okay.
And the last job I know of that Laverne Bailey told me that he worked up the Wikitick Road, and in fact there was a road up there called the Kelly Road that was, I don't know if it's still there or not, but if you go up the paved Hamma Hamma Road, it's I think it's just past the power line a mile or two, and that was called. They had some property up there that they logged.
Wow. Okay. And um, so now would be your uncle Walt.
Yeah, Walt was the
Really?
oldest,
Okay.
and Walt was the oldest, and but I don't think he started logging first. Walt had an oyster business down on Fulton Creek. Him and his wife ran for, I think, 10 years or so before Walt started logging and building road. And Walt ended up logging around the Canal area, and then he went out to the Forks Burn and worked out there for quite a while. And I know Charlie Springer worked with him out there, because I remember when Charlie and the kids all had the property there by the Brinnon store. When they came home from Forks, they had brought a bunkhouse with them, and a bunkhouse was about the width of a trunk bunk, and it was about 40 feet long.
Yeah.
And they lived in that house for oh, I don't know. I think I can remember them still in that house in 56 or 57.
Wow.
And they had Larry and Carl and Colleen, and then they built they built the house all themselves, and lived there. And then Walt bought a lot of property. He had bought a lot of tax title property. And when I was like, probably 10 or 12, he was just logging with an SJ4, and Charlie ran that side, Charlie Springer, and then Bill Broderson, Diet's dad, he was doing the major part of the. Walt would buy the timber sales, and Walt's little side with that SJ4 would pick the corners up, and then Bill Broderson would rig a tree and log the remainder. And then I think Walt quit logging probably, I would think, early 60s, something like that.
Okay.
And I always remember he had a shop above, well, used to be Wilcox's gas station. Um, it's right at the top of the hill past where Bob French lived
Sure.
on the right, and his shop was up on the hill. I think the shop's probably still
Yeah,
standing,
yeah, sure is.
but he had two big sled yarders up there that they'd hauled in from Forks, and they'd pushed them off on. They had two big logs sitting on the ground, and they must have pushed them off with a cat and slid them on those big logs. Because when we were kids, we'd get up and play on those things, and they were all hand friction, foot brakes
Wow.
on them, and that was like the ultimate toy. So
Yeah. Oh, wow. Do you remember whatever happened to those
I
machines?
don't. I think they probably got scrapped or something.
Sure.
I don't know. I wouldn't have known what they even were at that time. So, um,
Do you remember when Irvin got out of logging? What year that would have been?
um, well, I worked for him in 1966. I was 16 years old, and he was still logging. He was logging up the Big Quill right by the 10
Hmm.
Mile Shelter, um, and so he logged um, a couple years past that, I think.
Okay.
And after that, he did some little stuff, but he was. I think he always just ran one side. He had a road building side, and never had a wood tree, or
Hmm.
always had wood trees. Never
Always
had
okay.
he bought a. I remember he bought a new Skagit yarder, and it was a BU 80, and I think it was one of the first BU 80s made,
Wow.
and it was mounted on an old off-high Kenworth,
Hmm.
and Red Cook put it on the truck for him there on top of Mount Walker, and but I think probably he quit logging way before 1970 anyway.
Sure. And
And then let's see. After well, Art actually was older than Irvin, and Art moved to Crescent City, logged around the Canal area for a little bit, and then some of the Clements, and the Clements family is pretty old in Quilcene, and he told him he'd be better off to be down in Crescent City and log down there. So he went down there and logged, and I think he was pretty successful, but he was taking a big cat across a wood bridge, log bridge, and it collapsed on him, and I think he got killed in 65 or 66,
wow.
and and then my uncle Barney, he he cut most of the time around. He was a timber faller and started out, with hand tools, and then later on graduated to power saws. And he worked for not sure what year he moved down and started working for Simpson, but I would say it was probably in the early 50s, maybe late 50s. And he worked out of Camp Grisdale, and then later on he worked out of the Shelton area.
Okay.
So
Did he stick with that Camp Grisdale operation until it closed up, or?
I don't think so. I don't
Mm.
think so. I think he had a lot of good stories about the camp up there, but he didn't. I don't know if do you know Dale Hall?
I don't.
Okay, Dale was a side rod for Mankey, but Bill Hall was a safety man around here for a
Hmm.
while, and him and Barney were good buddies. They worked at Grisdale for a long time, cutting together. I think Bill was a cutter also, and they were coming back from Aberdeen one Sunday, and I think they had an old Model A or something like that, and they were going up the road, and there's a bear running up the road, um, and and Bill said, "Run him over, Barney," and so they tried to run over him, but they just ran up on him, and
Yeah.
and, and so the bear finally got out, and, but they were worried about him taking him over the bank with him. So
Yeah. Right. Wow.
so just you know 50s humor, I'd say,
Yeah.
or
Sure.
probably earlier than that, but
Do you have
anyway.
any good stories you remember the guys talking about from the Kelly family side with logging?
Um, I don't, I can't think of any right now. Irvin, he was pretty wild.
Mm.
I remember I was down at their house one time, and Irvin had a pretty good temper, and we went up there just to Jim and I walked up there just to see what was going on, and
Mm.
Irvin was working on something, and he came out from underneath it, and his face was beat red, and he had a big wrench in his hand, and he threw it at the side of the shop, and he says, "I'm going to town," and nobody said anything.
Sure.
So, uh, one thing about Walt, he was the oldest one of the family, and
Mm.
I don't know where he was working, but he had some type of a rig that had spoked wheels on it because he wouldn't trust his brothers, and so he'd lock it up to a tree there at the Duckabush, so they couldn't use it. But they'd take the wheel off of it, put the spare on, and drive it around while he was gone.
Oh,
So
that's great.
yeah, so I'm sure there's a lot of them, but I just don't recall them right now. So
From piecing together stories over the years, maybe you could substantiate this one for me. I talked to Lou Parsons a long time ago, and he told me a story about him and his dad going up Duckabush, and they were putting. I thought he said it was a 671, or yeah, he put a 671 motor in an old front end loader with his dad. And when they started doing this project, it was early in the morning. It just started to snow, and by the time they finished, there was so much snow on the ground. He said they had to get that loader going, or they weren't going to make it out because it was the only piece of equipment up there. And it was a road building operation. And would that have been something that Walt was up to, or would that have been a Marvin Lorenzen type of thing? Or
boy, I'm not sure. I don't know. I did think of another Irvin story though.
mm-hmm.
Irvin was working in the rigging for somebody. I think it was down in that Hamma country somewhere, and him and the hook tender got in an argument, and so this was, and they were moving the yarder, and it was a sled yarder, but they're going out across the timber,
Sure.
across the wood, and they got all the guy lines. They've got it all hooked up to the sled, and they're taking off. Well, they Irvin, he's walking down the road, and or through the woods. I'm not sure if there was a road there or not. There was a guy line laying right beside a stump that was already notched, so he grabbed it and
Oh no.
and hooked it to the stump. And he said he was a mile down the road, and they were still trying to pull on it. So
Wow.
yeah, our neighbor in Brinnon was Piggy Lorenzen. Um, his real name was Marvin, but everybody called him Piggy. His name of his logging company was Hardly Able Logging, and he was a high climber and worked in probably the last part of the steam era. And Piggy, he went to school in Brinnon. I think he might have went to the Duckabush school too earlier. Um, but Piggy had a lot of knowledge about the local logging, and he was telling me that I believe it was the Clements family or Clements Logging. They were logging up the Dosey Wallops drainage, and they had a railroad car that ran from um, the Dosey Wallops River um, up behind the Brinnon School. It went up through where Stan Johnson used to live, our old house, and it went right to the river. And I think when they splashed the river, they dammed the river up, probably at the mouth of the canyon there on Rocky Brook.
Okay.
And then they would send down a big stream of water, but the Dosey Wallops flattens off right about at that point, and so they had a rail system that went out through Piggy Lorenzen's place, what probably through Whitney's now,
Mm.
and through at that time it would have been John Kroll's driveway, which was right next to where Herb used to live.
Sure.
It would have been on the north side of that, and that goes right straight down our old driveway to the river.
Mm.
And they used oxen to drag the empty car back up, and they had some little steam rig probably to load it, and they would take the logs out to the bay, and then at high tide they'd float them to wherever they could sell them.
Wow. Did Piggy say what year that would have been, like that they quit doing that?
I think that was real early. I think that was, maybe some of the first logging in Brinnon
Okay.
when they were doing that. And Piggy later on, he had a triple drum cat. It was a Caterpillar tractor. I think it's now it would look like a D6, D7 size,
Hmm.
but it had drums on it on the back of it. He'd rig wood trees and log with that. And then later on, he he got to the point where he pretty much just worked by himself. He'd go out and fall the trees and yard them with it. He had a skidder and a cat, and he also at one point had a sawmill, and you couldn't sell small logs in that era, so you had to turn them into square cants, and then most of those went to Pope and Talbot, and they dumped them in Pleasant Harbor, right near where the state dock is, um, in Pleasant Harbor.
Sure. Did they actually raft the cans
They
there?
did, they
Wow.
did, and I'm not too sure when they towed the logs out of the main dump there that they didn't take the cans right with them then. They just for some reason, used a different dump. Um, and Royal Roush was another guy that had a cant mill in that same era. And he would, I think him and Piggy would work together because Piggy told me one time that old triple drum he had, Piggy, no matter what age it was, everything he had ran.
Yeah.
And he started up his old triple drum one time, and the exhaust manifold was leaking, and Piggy said, well, he says that was my own fault. He said Royal and I had been out on Sunday afternoon and we were drinking a little bit, and when we got home, our wives weren't very happy with us, so we came to work without any lunch, and so they were working right by the water, so they went down and got some oysters and set them on the exhaust manifold there, let them warm up a little bit before they ate them, and he said it rusted out my exhaust
Oh,
manifold.
wow.
So, but
Yeah.
I remember one time Royal Roush. There was a guy lived out Black Point named Sarge. He was a retired Seattle cop. I don't recall his last name right now, but he had a beautiful, I think it was a 37 or 38 Buick straight eight, and for some reason those motors worked really good with a sawmill, and they had a manual transmission.
Hmm.
And what they would do is they'd cut them off, um, probably about, I don't know, 3 feet behind the transmission, and maybe they just right where it went into the rear end, and they would move that in one piece, and they would just move the car back and plug it into the mill, and they would
Wow.
just pull the hand throttle out on the old Buick, and if they had big wood, they might have to go in first gear, and if they had smaller wood,
Wow.
they'd gear it up. But I mean, this was a beautiful old car, and they just cut it right in half and
Wow.
made an engine out of it. And then, there were some guys. One of the mechanics for my uncle Walt was a guy named Slow George. He worked up or lived up the Duckabush, and he worked out of Walt's shop up above where the old Flying A gas station was.
Hmm.
And then Red Cook, Red kept everybody working. Yeah, he could fix anything. One guy said Red could fix air. So, but he could come up there, and he had a set of cutting torches and a hammer and a big welder, and he always had some old scrap iron in the back of his pickup, and whatever you'd broke, he could fix it right there. He was an amazing guy of what he could do, and a real character to boot. So he was in it later on. His son Herb, he cut most of his life, and worked a lot with French's, and they later on cut for us some. So
Yeah, okay.
um, let's see, who else is there?
You mentioned that oh, the Mueller man worked with Royal some.
Oh yeah, George Mueller.
George
George
Senior.
Mueller
Okay.
was a I think that was Royal's right hand man.
Hmm.
George worked for him for a long time, and another guy named Jim Andrews. Jim lived there just above the power line on the Duckabush, and his father lived up Fulton Creek,
Hmm.
up by almost right at the power line.
Sure.
And when I was a kid, we went up there. I think it was a school thing or a Cub Scout thing or something. He had a steam tractor, big one, that they'd run like a thrashing machine out of or something like that, and he fired that up for us, and that was pretty interesting to see an old wood-fired machine actually run.
Wow.
So
Do you remember where Royal's mill, Camp Mill was at and all that?
oh, they were all portable.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Yeah, they just moved them around. They were just on a trailer, and they just hook them up behind the truck and go. And I'm sure he had a truck that he hauled the cans on.
Oh.
So they had some kind of a front end loader to load the cans.
So tell me about your first exposure to logging.
Well, that was probably when I took my first breath. But but my my mom's family and a lot of my dad's family were loggers. And it really, like on the canal, there wasn't a whole lot of choices.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty much, you either worked in the oyster business or you were a logger. And most of my family chose loggers. And my dad, the place he had behind the Brinnon school, it had some timber on it. So um, Tom Phillips was my dad's brother, and Tom lived about 4 miles up the Dosey Wallops. He lives right where Diet Marie
Okay.
Broderson live, and Ernie and Bobby, they were Tom's sons, and they were going to log a piece for my dad, and they had a little, I think it might have been a BU-15, but it had a Model A engine on it, 4-cylinder, and they drug the logs out to the old road that was there, and I'm not quite sure how they loaded them because they didn't have self loaders in that era. But I was probably about 8 or 10 years old, and they were moving the yarder, and the yarder was on it was just like a donkey sled, only it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't very big. You could just about haul this thing on a flatbed pickup. And we were going along in that Model A engine. The distributor's right in the center of the head, and it had these little brass strips that came off of it and went to each spark plug. And
Wow.
and we were going along, and the donkey engine didn't sound right. And one of my cousins, either Bobby or Ernie, said, "Well, it's that brass thing right there. You want to put that back on there, and it's still running on 3 cylinders." Well, I still remember touching that brass strip.
Okay. Lit you up.
And that was pretty hot. And raining. Um, and then after that, I was about 14, and I was saving up to buy a car. So my dad said I could go back there and behind the house and cut some cedar poles. There's a guy named Ted Butcher in Squim that bought cedar poles. So he had an old gear drive hemlock or an old home light.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went back there, and I never fell a tree other than with an axe as a kid in my life. And
Mm-hmm.
like all those guys in the that era, they just expect you to know how to do it.
Sure.
So first tree I fell, a big maple limb came out of the tree and hit me, and so I figured I probably needed a hard hat after that.
Wow.
So we fell load or two of cedar poles, and then Red Cook stopped by and yarded them for us, and then somehow they got hauled. I don't know, but anyway, we did that, and then me and some of the Corey boys, Randy and Rusty, we used to cut shake bolts together and do stuff like that. So we had a little bit of power saw experience. And after that, when I was 16, then I could work for my uncle Irvin. So uh, he was logging up 10 Mile Shelter on the Big Quill, and he was building road up above Sink Lake. Um, Up originally, that was one of the Mount Townsend trailheads,
Mm-hmm.
and so we were working up there, and I was setting chokers behind that TD 25, and Yeah, I mean education with a 1 1/8 drum line and 7/8 chokers,
Wow. Yeah.
and so that was a pretty good experience. And as we were doing that, there was a lot of rock in that job, and so Irvin didn't have a big rock drill, so he had Alvin Ackerman was running my uncle Walt's rock drill, and it was a big rock drill because he had Walt had built all that road up Merhut, and that was almost a rock drill show right from the get go. Lots of rock drilling, and so he came up there, and Alvin, he taught me how to tamp the powder into the hole and put the caps in and all that kind of stuff, and that was going along pretty good. Alvin would shoot it, and we'd move it a cat up, push it off, and then we'd go again with the rock drill.
Wow.
And Irvin came up. He was working down below, and he had the 25 was he's a good cat, but he had an old D8 down by the 10-mile shelter, but he had to go down, make a little spur road, and there were some big fir stumps down there where they just logged. And he came up and he said, "Take some of that powder and go down there and shoot those stumps." I ribboned it off going through the out through there, and so I said, "Okay." And he gave me about 80 feet of electric wire and some caps and a bunch of powder in the pickup, and down the hill we went. Well, I got down there. I never shot a stump in my life, and so uh, Ron Twitty, he was tending hook for. He's a lives down on the Skoke. Him and Dennis Allen were Irvin's probably top men, and so I went and asked Ron. I said, "How do you shoot a stump?" And he said, "Well, you got a bar." And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, you just bar in there and you just put a stick of powder in there and shoot it." And then he said there'd be a pretty good hole, and just dig it out a little bit, and then put some powder in to blow it out. And I said, "Well, how much powder do you use?" He said, "Well, just use a stick for shooting that primer hole in it, and then just go ahead and, if it's a big stump, put 8 or 10 sticks in, and if it's a bigger stump than that, put 15 in." And so I went out there and I a little leery about this deal, and so I
Yeah.
get my primer hole stick, and I picked one on the opposite side of where I was going to be, and
Yeah.
so I string that wire out, and boy, it's seeming pretty short, and so I touched it off, and I went out and laid down in the ditch, and got as low as I could get to a foxhole there, and I touched it off, and man, it was a big boom. And I looked up, and there's all kinds of, I thought they were rocks, but it was just bark coming down
Mm-hmm.
around me. So I thought, well, that was pretty exciting. So I'm not going to load this one up too hot. So I put about 10 or 12 sticks in it, not like, because it's a pretty good sized stump. And so I did the same routine, and I got it all tamped in there and got down in the ditch and touched her off again. And one root, the crew bus was down the road about 700 feet, and a root went over the top of the crew bus out through the timber. And
Wow.
and
Yeah.
Ron Twitty came up to me and he says, "What in the hell are you doing?" And I said, "Well, you told me to put in, maybe 15 sticks or so." And he looked at the box of powder. I had 2-inch rock powder, it was 2 inch by 16, and he thought I was talking about those 1 by 8 stumping powder.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know if Irvin was trying to kill me or what, but anyway, I got that figured out.
Yeah.
So and then after that, I think that that following year, um, I no, I think I worked on the boom when I was 17. The Pope dump where Taylor Shellfish is now.
Mm-hmm.
That was a long dock that went out there, and I worked on the log boom there in the summer, just pushing logs around mostly with Jay, and there was another guy named Smith that worked on the boom there, and Bob Swanson was there too, and Bob was a good boom man, but he was never very motivated to work. Uh, Bob and Jay, that was Mrs. Yelvick's brothers,
Okay.
and they were some backwoods kind of boys. Jay lived on a float house there beside the dock for years until they converted it to just rollways. And Bob, I don't think ever lived in a house that had windows in it.
Wow.
He lived on an old boat there that was just north of the dock. And when the tide was out, the boat was almost on its side, but it
Wow.
didn't bother Bob too much. And then he had a pretty good house there, oh, by where Buddy Smith's trailer park is now. He owned that
Okay.
property, and he had a pretty nice house built there, but never did put any windows in it.
Yeah.
And he was a real character. He was one of the last the last real outdoor guys. They had a cabin up. I was never to it, but it was somewhere off of the Lena Lake Trail, and you'd go back up there. And Bob would go up there sometimes and spend all summer. And he was quite a ways back in there. He was 10, 12 miles up the trail. And one day I asked Bob, I said, because they didn't have horses or anything. I said, how did you get enough food, to go up there and stay all summer? And he looked at me like that was the stupidest thing anybody had ever said to him. He said, there's already food there.
Huh. Wow.
And, and he would survive fine.
Yeah.
Uh, he, I, I, I bought some timber from him one time. He had a pretty nice piece there north of Quilcene, and I could never find him. And so I just drove up there one time, and it was a pretty rough old logging road. And he had an old Ford Courier. And I got up there, and it was frosty, it was like late hunting season. And he was laying there inside the pickup in a sleeping bag. And he got out of bed and put his shoes on, and we're talking a little bit. And he goes over there and starts rustling around in the back of the pickup. And he's got a little Coleman stove and a frying pan. He said, I got to have some breakfast. He said, you want some breakfast? I looked in that frying pan, that looked a little rough for me. So I
Yeah.
said, no, I had a big breakfast already. Thanks, Bob, and,
Wow.
and moved on. But they were a couple, and those boys were world-class log rollers. They went back to New York to the World's Fair and performed for them, and
Really?
just a bunch of characters. Jay had a movie camera, which was pretty rare for that
Hmm.
time. And when they came back from New York, they went to Detroit and bought him a new car. And they were driving it back, and they went through Yellowstone. And they in the movie they had regular old logging jeans on, but they hadn't stagged them off yet. And they were rolled up about a foot, just to,
Wow.
to
Yeah.
cover the excess
Yeah.
material. And they'd be out along the road trying to wrestle at bears in the ditch and stuff. Just just
Just goofy stuff.
just wild. Yeah,
Wow.
that was a real interesting. I was fortunate enough to grow up in an era where everybody didn't go to the same school.
Mm.
And a lot of these guys had no school, and other ones had grad school.
Mm-hmm.
But it, they were a lot. There was a lot more variation in character
Sure.
than there is now. So, but what other old boys do we need to cover there? Should we just go to the next job, which would have been J&H?
Yeah, sure. Oh, that sounds good to me.
Okay. And one thing I should say about log dumps, so before I move forward, is to most people, they don't understand that in the old days they didn't haul logs very far.
Mm-hmm.
There was a log dump about like Quilcene probably had 3 or 4.
Sure.
And there was probably one down by the old shellfish lab area.
Mm-hmm.
And there was several in Brinnon. There was Dickman had a dump there by the Gooey Duck, and then the dump there that Swanson's ran, and Pleasant Harbor always had a dump, and Eldon had one. And so you did, once you got to the flat ground, you pretty much dumped your logs in the water.
Yeah,
And
you didn't have a whole lot of trucking time. It was just in the hills and out of the hills and back again.
yeah, well,
Sure.
and they didn't have much for trucks. So um, I remember Pappy Winters was talking one time about log trucks, and some of the other guys were talking about how how dangerous it was coming down out of these logging roads with these brakes we got, and they all had water brakes in. That was
Mm-hmm.
before they had Jake brakes, and Pappy, he was the oldest of the crew, and he said, you boys think you have bad brakes now. He said when we used to drive them old chain drive trucks, because all the brake was on the drive line, and so when the chain broke, you didn't have any brakes. So you better learn to back up really quick. So
Wow. Wow. Do you remember ever hearing Pappy Winters talking about when did he first start hauling logs? Chain drive, that's got to be to 20s, late 20s, early 30s.
well, I don't know, but I do know that a friend of mine, uh, Pappy Winter's house, he lived up Finch Creek there at Hoodsport,
Mm-hmm.
and his house burned down, and he had a lot of photos and stuff. And
Hmm.
Jim Thurman, a good friend of mine, he had a picture of Pappy with a load of logs on a chain drive Mack parked in the middle of Hoodsport, and he gave that to Pappy just because he'd lost all of his
Yeah.
other photos. So um, I don't know that much about if Pappy always lived in Hoodsport
Mm-hmm.
or if he lived there a long time, but
Sure.
I don't really know about that. But
Hmm. Yeah. So tell me something about when you worked with J&H there.
yeah, well, everybody, everybody knew everybody, and
Mm-hmm.
so uh, Jim Jarvis and Floyd Hovey. Floyd Hovey grew up in Brinnon. He the old Hovey place was right by just past the Jehovah Witness church on the Dosey. That was the Hovey place.
Oh,
Stan Johnson, I think, bought it.
sure. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Yep.
that flat before you get to the just before you get to the canyon, going
Sure.
up the. But they grew up there. I think Floyd and my mom were about the same age, but there was 4 or 5 boys there. Maybe I don't know. Maybe, I don't know how many kids he had, but
Hmm.
or how many brothers Floyd had, but um, local anyway.
And they operated out of Brinnon then.
No, no, they operated out of Hoodsport.
Oh, okay.
Jim Jarvis was from Hoodsport,
Okay,
and I
gotcha.
don't know if that was the reason, but they started sometime right after World War II. And anyway, I went to work for J&H, and they had I think it might have been it was a square tube. I think it might have been an old priest built,
Hmm.
or it could have been a heister. I'm not sure. But Roger Severin from Quilcene, Roger originally grew up out at just there by the casino in Squim. That's where Roger grew up, and then he lived in Brinnon and in Quilcene. The rest is he's still alive. He's married to a Kroll, Nancy Kroll, and Roger was running yarder, and a guy named Eddie Holmes was tending hook, and Jim ran shovel, and I got out in the woods, and that was my first time out in the rigging. And these other guys, they're like 35 years old. I'm thinking, well, these guys shouldn't be any problem to keep up with.
Yeah.
And I was by lunchtime, I was so tired I couldn't even eat.
Wow.
But I survived it, and it was a good summer. Um, I remember one time we were coming home from work, and we stopped by Springwater. Usually on Friday, the boys like to stop at Springwater Tavern and have a few drinks. Well, I was only 18,
Mm-hmm.
but nobody really cared.
Sure.
We got home, and my dad came out, and I got out of the crummy, and he says, "You been drinking?" And Roger, he stood up for him. He says, "If he's old enough to work, he's old enough to drink." And so,
Uh-huh.
and thank God that he said that.
Yeah, wow.
So, uh, but that was a good summer for me. And then I I'm not sure if I worked for East Guard next, or because after I was 18, um, I worked several different places. I'd sometimes I'd go to college for a quarter or two, and then I'd work. And I I think the following summer I ran the dump there or I didn't run the dump. I ran the dump machine
Hmm.
for Pope and Talbot, and they'd rebuilt that dump, and it had all rollways, and the dock was no longer there.
In Port Gamble, you
No,
mean?
this was at Brinnon.
Oh, okay. So where would that have been at?
It was right where the Taylor property is.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, and Alden Johnson, he was coming down into there, and then Walt was hauling logs in there. Joe Such was driving, and it was not real busy. I don't, or Walt's side wasn't. I think he was just logging with that SJ4 then, and they'd get 3 or 4 loads a day. But Halden was getting quite a few loads in there, and that was a bad dump to work at the summer because there was hardly any water there because it was it,
Mm-hmm.
Pleasant Harbor was a way easier dump to work in because you almost always had water. And there you'd fill up one rollway, and then they had about 4 or 5 rollways, and then you'd move the truck to the next one, and then when the
Wow.
tide finally came in, you had these big messes you had to try to untangle. So
So the Taylor property, that's the one that's kind of right across from Dosey Road there.
yeah, yeah, just
Yeah.
north of there.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. For all those who don't know, right there at the Dosey Wallops, just north of it on the right there, almost to that small bridge is what Gary's talking about, where that dump used to be at.
right. Yeah, because the Rocky Brook Road used to come straight down the hill and right under that
Oh,
that bridge,
uh-huh.
and that's how like Halden was logging up the Rocky. Halden Johnson was logging up Rocky Brook, and that's the way they'd come down. They wouldn't come down on the highway at
Oh,
all.
okay. Okay, I gotcha.
Yeah. So that and then after that, I did a stint with Erling Eastgard, and I was working with Ed and Kenny Harris there,
Oh,
and
wow.
they were a couple of characters to work for, and Erling, he was just a fine man. He was, if everybody came to the landing uh, for lunch, everybody would sit down and Erling would say grace,
Hmm.
and everybody would wait for that and then eat their lunch, and
Hmm.
we're very respectful to Erling. He was a good guy, and then oh, and with Halden Johnson, I think I might have worked for several outfits that summer. But Halden also had a couple of guys that worked with him, Tim Rochelle and Hungarian Mike,
Oh,
and
yeah.
they kind of. I'm not sure if they always ran the same equipment or not, but mostly what we saw up here were Tim and Hungarian Mike, and they were a couple characters for sure.
Do you remember much or have any stories about Hungarian Mike?
Well, not a whole lot. I remember one time they were working up Buck Mountain, and they were logging a blowdown strip, and I think Tim was running shovel, and when you're logging that blowdown stuff, a lot of those root wads kick loose and roll down the hill. Well, Tim had gone up to the pickup to get something out of the back of the pickup, and a stump started rolling down the hill. And so he got out of the back of the pickup, stand there in the road, and then it kept coming. So he took off running, but the stump landed in the back of the pickup.
Oh, no.
And I remember him driving it to the gooey dock, and I don't know how long those U joints were going to last, but the pickup was almost dragging on the
Oh,
bottom.
no. Wow.
But I did work during that same era. I did work for Buck Mountain, and
Hmm.
they were logging up the Dungeness, and I was working with Diet. Diet was tending hook, and Pat Yar was working in the rigging with me.
Hmm.
And I can't remember who was running yarder, but he was kind of cantankerous because the whistle would stick every now and then, and
Yeah.
he'd get out and have to tap on the solenoid. And of course, we're trying to blow the whistles, and he's standing right by the right by the whistle, and he'd get really irritated whenever it went off that close to his head. Yeah, but they just got that yarder, and I think that was the first tower they had and the only tower they ever had
Oh,
as far.
steel spar.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I think it was a Heister on a triple drum cat,
Oh yeah.
and
Uh-huh.
Diet and I were and Pat were all on the out in the rigging, and Carol Mercer, and he was one of the partners, and I think Ray Buckman and somebody else drove up there, and they were in cars, and they were going up to show place the the how good this tower worked. And
Uh-huh.
so Diet says, well, let's hook him a big turn, and show him what this rig will do. And so we went down, and Pat and I both wrapped our chokers up as much stuff as we could and took off down the hill. Well, it looked like three spiders going down the
Oh
hill.
no.
And they, uh, they kind of went off to the side a little bit, and they walked up on the guy line. And,
Oh no.
and so they're down there trying to get the guy line to drop down so they could get this turn off. And Diet's up there going, my God, what have you guys done to me here?
Oh no.
Yeah, but it was a lot of fun working with them.
What
So,
year would that have been, you think?
oh man, it had to have been maybe 69 or 70, something
Okay.
like that. And then let's see, after that, oh, I did a stint for, they widened out the power line from, I think it was Shelton to Discovery Bay.
Mm-hmm.
And so one summer, John Broderson, Diet's younger brother, he passed away a few years ago. We cut together, cutting right away on that power line, and that was a really good job for us. It paid like union wages. We were making like $6 an hour.
Yeah.
And
Big bucks.
it was big
Yeah.
bucks. And I had a borrowed power saw and a pair of wore out corks, so I was making good money. So that was a good summer. And then after that, sometimes on the weekend during that same stint, I'd work for the they had this skyline operation going up below Jefferson Lake, and they had the yarder up on top of the hill. I never did see the yarder, but and they had a mechanical carriage that would lock onto the skyline and then drop it down. I mean, they had 7 or 8 thousand feet of line out. Um, if you go up there, and I was just up there a few days ago and took a look at it, and it was still as far as I thought it was. And those boys would get that carriage was just a mechanical nightmare. I'd work about half the time,
Mm.
and these guys had get in the landing and step in the choker and go up, and they had this little safety chain thing they'd hook when they got up there, which was like almost no help. And
Wow.
and the guys in the rigging were all Austrians,
Mm.
and I don't think they ever drank water. I think they always drank beer.
Wow.
And it was it really wasn't very successful for a lot of reasons, but it just mostly because the carriage just wasn't consistent enough for them to constantly keep logging. In this day and age with the carriages they have now, it's probably a workable solution.
Sure.
But and then I think the Forest Service found that you know having the tree planters walk in 7,000 feet up a 100% slope to plant trees wasn't very effective, and um, for other reasons. But it was quite an operation. A couple of the lower units we ended up. I think Mankey's bought the sale, but we logged it, and they ended up putting a road right up through a couple of those units just to log some remainder timber that was
Wow.
there. So
Do you remember ever hearing why that sale was set up the way that it was?
I think it was an experimental thing.
Hmm.
The Forest Service used to do quite a bit of that. It's like the dog hair thing Herman's did, and the balloon logging thing they tried, and things like that.
Sure.
You know, uh, they had the guts and the willpower to at least give it a try, and it's not a bad idea, but the technology in that case just wasn't really there. I think this next outfit I work for, I work for Roger Adelman, and or Adelman, actually Roger and Dick, and they're from Hoodsport, and I'd known them before. My dad had hauled for them. At the last time I saw them, they were up on Merhut, loading with end hooks. They had an old like TD9 or something like that, yard and salvage logs, but now they had a pretty good size outfit. And we were out at Nolan Creek, and we big cedars, like 14, 16 foot through cedars, and most of them they were splitting, or they'd try to have us split them in the woods with a
Sure.
just build two chokers up and try to split them going down a crack in them or something like that. And that was quite a job. We worked there for 6 weeks, and one day it cleared off and we could see the ocean.
Wow.
It was pretty damp out there. I made a bad decision of not doing something else that winter. So
Did you work with Carl Springer out there?
no,
Rattleman? Okay.
no. Roger was running shovel, and Canadian Indian named Ronnie Plains was the hook tender. And Randy Queen, Randy was about my age. We were setting chokers. And yeah, Ronnie Plains, he was probably the last guy I saw that notched stumps with an axe.
Wow.
And you didn't use his axe. He was one of those guys that axe was. He had it honed up just how he wanted. He didn't want you hacking into some old rock with it or something like that.
Wow. Do you remember what they were yarding with?
I don't. I think they still had one of Roger's old. I don't think it was a Medill. It might have been an older Burger. I don't know. But right after that, Jim Adelman came up from. He was from Sweet Home, Oregon. He was Dick's brother, and he came up and he had a Skookum Tyee yarder. And for the era, that was probably the best yarder out there, because that was before they had Wichita brakes, or and anything like that. But this had a regenerative system where you could interlock your haulback and your mainline drums, and so you were actually, instead of using all brake, to hold your rigging up, you're actually, synchronizing the drums going in and out at the same speed. So, and it did have the ability to slip. So it was a good system, and it was a really good yarder, and it really improved what I worked under it later with Roger, and I worked with Dick, or not with Dick, but Jim Adelman's had a job up by Scar Pass, and Jim was just running that side by himself, and I don't remember who was running shovel, but I got to work with Jim a lot. He's a really good logger, been doing it a long time, and real patient to, tell you what you should be doing instead of what you were doing.
Sure.
And after Pat and I started logging together, I'd have wished I'd have asked a lot more questions to those boys who had done all that stuff, and done it well. And just same old deal.
That Skookum, was that like a 114 or something? I've never worked under one, but looking around one of those machines, it looks like it's got a D9 undercarriage type thing. It's pretty good sized crawler.
Yeah. It was a big machine for the era, and and then I think Skagit and Washington and all those other guys started taking a look and seeing what they were doing, and we're gonna have to do something different here, or we aren't gonna be selling any iron. Back in the old days of just running the rigging on the ground wasn't working. So
yeah.
And then after that, I was working down here for somebody, and Don Westerland from Forks called me up and wanted to know if I'd come out there and hook for him.
Hmm.
And I think I was just 21 then, and I told Don, I said, well, I got a good job down here now, and I said, I don't really have a good reason to go to Forks, and he said, well, he says, I'll make it worth your while to come up, and um, so I said, okay, and he said all that there's a hotel right beside the Vagabond there in Forks, Woodland Hotel, and they lots of loggers stayed there, and they cooked your meals and sent you out with
Hmm.
lunch and all that. And he says that works pretty well. And so I said, okay, well, give it a try. So he said, well, why don't I meet you up there tomorrow at like 4 o'clock? And I said, okay, that'll work. So in the Vagabond. So I go up the Vagabond, and I walk in there, and my hair's about like this, and I walk in there and sit down at the bar, and the guy, bartender, all loggers sitting at the bar, and and I, I took my ID out and put on the bar, and about 3 stools down, somebody says, "Does it say on there if it's male or female?" And I thought, this is getting off to a good start.
Yeah.
And so, uh, fortunately, Don walked in at the same time, and the guy that had made that statement, he had been well known for get Carl Cinema, and he was well known for having problems with. So
Hmm.
so that turned out to be kind of funny. So, but anyway, I worked for Don for I don't know, 6 or 8 months, which is pretty long for me,
Sure.
and I started out there in the spring, and Bill Morris, I'd gone to school with him
Hmm.
over in Cheney by Spokane, and Bill and I were talking all the time, and Bill said, "Is there any work out there for me?" And I said, "Oh yeah, there's plenty of work out here." And so Bill came out,
Hmm.
and we spent another few months there at the at the Woodland, and that place. I think that was early 70s. Yeah, it would have been 71, something like that. And that place was just booming. At well, whatever time we were going to work, 5 o'clock or whatever, the Crummie'd pick us up in front. There's Crummies pulling up, begging you to get in the Crummie with them,
Wow.
and just and and we actually ended up doing that. I think uh, Don was just about done with. We were working up on Owl Mountain, and he was about done, and so we jumped ship there one morning. We just got our gear out of the Crummie and got into
Hmm.
another one. Went out for Snell's, and for Dick and God, what was his right? Dick and Russ Snell,
Hmm.
and good guys. Worked for them for a while, and it was funny working for them. We were shotgunning, and Dick was hung on a big cedar stump. They were, I don't know, we were maybe out 1,500 feet or so. And the yarder engineer, he's watching his drum, and he always wants, to bring that skyline up to the same spot. And pretty soon the chokers are dragging, and we're going, what the hell's going
Oh
on?
no.
And so he picks it up a little bit, and this Dick was on a huge cedar stump up this draw. Well, that cedar stump was just coming down the draw, and it was pushing about 300 yards of stumps and
Oh, bringing
everything
some real
else.
estate with it.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
And so we got that figured out. And so that was kind of funny. So,
Oh
and
man.
then let's see, where'd we go from there? Oh, Bill and I, we decided to get out of the rainy country. So we came down, went to work for Jim Thurman. Jim was cutting hop poles out there um, in Shelton on some just about non-forestable
Yeah, yeah.
land that the poles were. You know what hot poles are?
Yeah. Huh?
Yeah, and we did that for a while, and then Jim had a job over in Enumclaw, and we went over there and worked for him there, and a little job at Potlatch, we did that, and then let's
Oh,
see.
hey, real quick. Explain hot poles for everybody on here.
Okay, hop poles are when they grow hops for beer.
Mhm.
They, I think they're like a 22-foot pole, and they put up like cables and nets that the hops grow up, and then when they're ready to harvest them, somehow they cut those hops off that into and load them in a truck, and away they go to the brewery, I think. But all I saw was they just hold up the the wires that hold the growth area up. And I think that this was such a poor operation that the truck would go over and he'd leave the bottom row of hot poles and he'd haul hay back. So
Uh, what did Bill do most of the time on those jobs that you guys worked out in Forks?
he was chasing most of the time. He worked in the rigging uh, some, and then he after we got down with Jim, I think we worked for Mankey. Mankey had a thinning sale up Mount Walker, up the Lookout Road,
Mm-hmm.
and I was just working for Mankey's, just a day wage kind of deal. And I was cutting, and Rusty Corey was cutting up there, and Bill got a job running yarder for him, and he ran yarder for Mankey's for quite a while. And then after we bought that 739, then he came to work for us
Mm-hmm.
and did that. Um, but yeah, Bill, he was just a good hand for anything. He was very handy, good friend. We hunted a lot together. And I contracted a little bit for Mankey's cutting. And I do have one of the guys, I can't remember his name. He was cutting up there for Mankey's, and he was just a character. He'd been a tramp logger. And um, Virgil Mankey came up, and there was one patch of really nice old growth in that thinning sale, and they had a special mill deal for that. They
Mm-hmm.
had a sale for that wood, and he came up and he sat us all down in the woods, and he said that we got to have these links, and they got to be perfect. And so anyway, Bud Valin was cutting there. I don't know if you know
Mm-mm.
anything about him, but anyway, he was cutting there, and Bud's sitting there with a grin on his face, and Virgil says, "You understand what I want?" And Bud says, "Virgil, I'm going to cut them just like diamonds for you." And this guy, he was just a character. He was a serious alcoholic, but he was a funny guy. He was telling me he was working up in Alaska, and he said he worked up there quite a bit, and he would work till the 4th of July just for the party.
Mm-hmm.
He'd work from April to the 4th of July, and then they'd take 2 weeks off. And anyway, he said he was in Ketchikan, and he said they met some girls, and the girls were headed back to Seattle, so they decided to go with them. So they went to them, and they got to Seattle, and he said he finally was broke in Wenatchee, and he said he was totally out of money, and so he said he got a job picking apples, and he said he made I think he said he had $18, and that was enough money to get him back to Seattle. And then there was uh, like a contract guy that would hire people and pay their trip back to Ketchikan
Oh, okay.
to get a job. And so Bud said he had $18, and he said he had enough money in his pocket he could put his clothes in the laundromat. So he said he went across the street and put his clothes in the laundromat, went over to the store to cash his check and go get his bus ticket. And he said his check was for $18.60, and the person that cashed the check gave him $186
Wow.
back. And he said, for all I know, them clothes are still spinning around in there. So,
Wow. That was a lot of money back then.
oh yeah, it
Yeah.
was. It was. Yeah. Yeah. One time, Bill and I were at the. There used to be a laundromat at the Gooey Duck,
Okay.
and so we'd take our clothes down there and then go up and have a few beers while the clothes were washing. And a guy came by, Dick Borden from
Well,
Quilcene,
yeah.
and he said, "You boys want to go fight a fire in Oregon?" And we said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, we got to go right now." He said, "We got to be there at like 5 o'clock tonight." And so we said, "Okay." And so we stopped by the house and got our saws, and we were down there 2 weeks. And when we came back, our laundry was folded up on a table in the laundromat at the Gooey Duck.
Wow.
And I
Gosh,
thought
that's cool.
I thought that was a pretty good sign that Brennan was pretty honest.
What year was that?
Oh, it had to be in early 70s.
Hmm. Did you work with Dick Borden much outside of that deal down in Oregon?
I tried not to.
Yeah.
No, Dick was all right.
Yeah.
He was just a different guy.
Yeah.
So
I've heard that. Was he Bullbuck
for Wally,
for Wally?
yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, he was an okay guy.
Hmm.
So, but when I worked for Mankey, Dale Hall, he was a timber faller and side rod. Carl Miller, Carl
Yeah.
Carl just uh, retired from Mankey, I think, just last few months.
Yeah, I heard that Tom James got him to come and run that little LS 98 garter for him or something.
Oh
So,
yeah,
yeah.
oh yeah, good. And Terry Corey was running the shovel, and Bill was running the yarder for Mankey,
Okay.
that little Washington
Oh,
swing
sure.
yard, little swing yarder. And I think we're just about to the point where Pat and I hooked up here.
Okay.
So, and I didn't take any notes on that.
Yeah.
So, um, well, I'd kind of decided I'd always, I wanted to have my own company, and I'd kind of tossed it around and had a couple opportunities that didn't really look too well for me. And Pat and I had talked some about me going to work for him, and I really wasn't that interested about just going to work for somebody at that point. And then we started talking about maybe doing it together. And I had known Pat a long time. Um, Pat and I first met. I think I was probably I'm just going to say 10 years old,
Hmm.
and I'm walking home from the Brinnon school, and this guy pulls up and he's driving like a I don't know 56, 57 Pontiac convertible, and he unrolls the window and says, "Do you know where Bob Phillips lives?" And I said, "I sure do. I'm his son. I'm going to the house right now." And he said, "Well, hop in." And so we hopped in and drove home, and that was how I met Pat.
Hmm.
And then Pat hauled logs. I think maybe then Pat might have still been driving for Buck Mountain,
Okay.
but he got a truck not long after that, or if
Sure.
he didn't already have one. And anyway, that was the first time he'd met Dad, I think. And anyway, it was always a good relationship, and Pat was a good, hardworking guy, and he actually put the deal together with Delson Logging, or Delson Mill, to do the deal. And we uh, Pat definitely had more money than I had, and I had some money saved up and an old pickup and some power saws, and I borrowed $2,000 from my folks,
Hmm.
and we got that old Bucyrus shovel to get pay him back by the thousand as we logged
Sure.
the sale, and we paid $15,000 for that for that Bucyrus shovel. Every time I look at that, I think that might have been worth 4,000 for salvage, you know.
Yeah.
But it would, you know, that thing would always run. I mean,
Hmm.
it would always work. I don't know how Pat kept it running, but he always had to have a crescent wrench and a screwdriver on hand. And it, you know, it was a pony motor start,
Oh,
had a
wow.
cat motor in it, and I'm not sure anybody else could have started it. You know,
Wow.
it was kind of like if you didn't hold your mouth right and
Yeah, you're in trouble.
and do it right, that thing wasn't going to run. So and you know, it had almost no ability to travel.
Hmm.
So after we got a cat, we just tow it with an A-frame. We
Really?
had Red Cook weld us some pad eyes on there. We just we just tow it around, and it had so little uh, elevation
Hmm.
that we'd almost always have to have it on a hump. We'd always have to build a hump. Well, you know, that thing would only reach about 12 feet anyway, you know, and
Sure.
so, you know, you just about had to land it on the operator's seat to get a hold of the log.
Oh my
So
gosh.
it
Yeah.
was it was a tough job for Pat. I bet his knees probably would have lasted another 100 years if he had to run that thing.
Yeah. Wow.
So in the yarder, it was the best thing we could afford,
Hmm.
and it was pretty. You know, those old BU-75s weren't bad for what they were made for, but
Hmm.
we tried to do as much shotgunning as we could. Of course, it didn't have any brakes on it. You know, it just had old band brakes, and and it was horribly off balanced when you went to put the tube up. Man, that back end of that thing got light, you know. And later on, after we bought an old TD-25 from Buck Mountain,
Hmm.
and we built a couple straps that you could run off the jacks,
Okay.
and you could put it to each corner bit, hold that down to keep it from tipping over, because
Oh,
man, it was scary, you know.
wow.
So
Where'd you get that from, that yarder?
you know, I think we bought it from an outfit out of Tacoma. I don't remember the name. I'm sure they aren't in business anymore, but it was pretty much at the back of the lot.
Sure.
You know, it wasn't up with the pretty stuff.
Uh-huh.
So
How long did you all use that for?
I think we used it for about 3 years, probably, maybe more than
Hmm.
that. It was it was what we had. You know, I don't think we drew any wages for about a year and a half. So
And as soon as you could upgrade to get the BU-84, you guys
yeah,
did it.
yeah, that was like heaven after
Yeah.
having that beast. So
So now, when you guys, Pat brought it up that you guys got your first sale up at Circle Pass, and then how long did that sale last for?
you know, I think we logged up there for about 6 or 7 months, maybe,
Hmm.
might maybe longer than that. We we didn't get a lot of production. We it was all it all bordered onto log, almost all into logged off timber. You know,
Oh,
and so
sure.
there wasn't. We had tailhole problems, and John Randall cut it for us, and we should have left a lot more tail trees.
Okay.
But trying to line the tail trees up with no stumps, um, it we just never had really good lift. You know, the back third of the unit, you're dragging the chokers out from underneath the butt rigging.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So and you know, and part of that was, you know, my own fault for not laying it out better.
Hmm.
And you know, it's one of those deals. Is if I'd listened to some of these guys I'd worked for over the years, I'd have done a lot better over time.
It was the learning curve.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Sure.
yeah. It's a lot more fun when that rigging's in the air.
Yeah.
Blue, come on.
Here.
And got some better stuff. And uh, we that little yarder, you know, it didn't pull real hard either, you know. So you know, you could have a lot weaker stump, and then you go to the 84, it'd pull pretty good. And
Sure.
so you know, you constantly had to be upgrading your
Yeah.
thinking, and and stuff like that. And
Sure.
the main thing a hook tender's got to be able to do is keep the rigging in the air and
Mm-hmm.
have a quick solution when that fails. So
Out of all those jobs that you guys did, because um, like we talked about earlier, I've got some pictures that I've come across from when you guys logged Alder Lake and Mount St. Helens and um, up Big Quill, Tunnel Creek area, and Jorstead Creek. I mean, were they all pretty good sales, or would you say they were just, they were all right? Did you have any one of them that stuck out as being better than the others, or?
well, it seems like most sales we got had, you know, a lot of good and not too much bad,
Mm-hmm.
and if you could, figure out ways to, always make those other areas, um, a little faster
Sure.
logging, because good thing about it, if you have bad timber, you should be able to walk through it pretty fast.
Mm-hmm.
If you can get your rigging in the air and stuff like that, then. But we logged a lot of good timber, not necessarily big timber, but like that stuff up by Jefferson Lake, it wasn't big wood, a big tree up there is probably 4 foot or so. And, those kind of logs just logged nice,
Sure.
you're not pulling tail holts and breaking chokers
Yeah.
and
Now there's a picture I came across of the yarder tipped over onto the, um,
that old lima.
yeah.
Yeah.
And what was the deal there?
Well, we we came around. We were diamond leading,
Mm-hmm.
so you've got a block purchase on the top of your tube,
Sure.
and we had a lot of deflection. We were hung way out, and we were just trying to cheat it, you
Mm-hmm.
know, going a little too far, and we probably could have done something different there.
Sure.
So we we tipped the 739 over up right above Elk Lake too.
Really?
Yeah, we were hung in in some just old logging, and we tied as many stumps together as we could, and you get momentum on, you get a turn up in the air, and you
Sure.
pull one stump,
They all start
and
popping.
yeah, and everything starts coming behind it. So never a good thing, but fortunately, every time that happened, nobody got hurt.
Yeah.
So there's a whole lot of scrap iron coming down around people, and
Sure. How bad of a mess was that to fix that machine up after it tipped over up at Elk Lake?
oh, that wasn't too bad.
Okay.
It wasn't too bad. We fixed it on site,
Oh yeah.
so it wasn't it when it went into the other guy lines, it went over pretty slow.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was a little hard to get Billy to pull very hard on it after for a week or two after we got it going again.
Sure. Yeah, I know that feeling. Yeah.
Yeah, when you're standing on the side of the windshield.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Huh. And so how long did you guys log with the 84 um, until you got into that 739?
Oh boy, um, must have been 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
Um,
And did you pretty much at the point when you got that bigger yarder split into two sides?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. We ran. I think we ran two sides almost entirely. We Pat was on one and I was on the other, and we were able to keep enough work.
Sure.
I got to the point where, or we got to the point where I ended up not being the hook tender,
Mm-hmm.
and Joe Duckett was doing that, and then I was out trying to find enough work to keep us going, building landings, bidding jobs, and doing that kind of stuff.
Sure. Okay.
So the, but that Shelton job, once we got that job, that was 28 million feet, and so that, and plus we logged more of that because the 28 million feet was just on Forest Service land,
Okay.
and that we logged, that one job over by you go through Matlock and go up on the hill, and we were on the south side of the Skoke there.
Is that what's called South Mountain, or is that
Could
something
be. It's
different?
it's where
Okay.
all those antennas are,
Oh, okay.
and
Sure.
we were on the and I looking back on it, I think the reason we got that job is because we were successful doing what we told them we could do on that 28 million feet, and it
Hmm.
was terrible ground. One of the cutters got killed up there, one of
Oh,
the
wow.
contract cutters, and they're just really nice timber. But I've never seen anything like this before. I mean, the timber was so thick and good that it would pile up against the stumps
Oh,
and it would push the stumps out,
oh,
and
wow.
then all of that timber would go down the hill and just I mean, it's all bucked up and it's just
It's a mess.
busting up and slabbing up. And this was a big unit. It was on private ground, and it was probably, I don't know, 100 acres maybe in one unit, and there was only two places you could walk out of there. It had
Wow.
these big bare rocks, and how the timber grew that good on that ground, I don't know. But
Wow.
the the cutter that got killed, he was jacking a big hemlock up a draw,
Hmm.
trying to save the wood, and it was a big hemlock. It was like 4.5 foot or something like that. Well, when he left the stump, it started to go, and he left the stump. He had to actually go kind of along the tree,
Sure.
up a ridge, and that tree backed down. It didn't
Oh,
catch on the stump; it backed down past him. Well, those hemlocks had wide limbs, and it swept him, under
sure.
the tree, and just a terrible thing. You know,
Oh,
we had, we'd had some guys get hurt for us, in the past, but and he was the we Rick Fitchett from Shelton was doing the cutting, and a really good cutters, but that was a heartbreaker there for a lot of people.
oh, wow.
But that was probably the I don't know if it was the toughest job we ever logged, but it was a difficult job just because usually we had like you know 4 to 5,000 feet of line out. Even though we were only yarding. Maybe at the most we might have been out 2,500, 3,000 feet that we were
Sure.
yarding, but we just had to go out so far to get any lift. And it's well, have you seen that? You've seen that video,
Yeah, I have.
where like the rigging crew, a lot of times you couldn't even see where they were. You're dropping down in these
Yeah.
holes, and it was, but it was beautiful timber.
Wow. So, I'm going to back up here a little bit. When you guys first got the 739 and you went up Tunnel Creek, is
Yeah,
that your,
yeah,
okay?
yeah.
So when you did that job, how did you bump into Ernie Nielsen to talk to him about laying that out with using that big tower?
Well, we tried to talk to everybody we could. And Ernie had done a lot of skyline logging,
Mm,
and we obviously hadn't. And it was kind of in that era, there wasn't that many jobs they were laying out
mm,
that were because this was um, I think this was one of the first skyline jobs the Quilcene district had laid out.
okay,
And they had a lot of weird stuff. It was like one of the units we logged, you clear cut the first 2/3 of the unit, and then the back, the the last part down by the river was thinning,
oh gee,
but it
okay,
wasn't thinning in like what I mean. It was taking out a lot of the merged timber.
sure,
It was a more of a riparian zone
mm-hmm,
issue than a forestry issue.
sure,
So, but I mean, when you've got 250 feet of lift down in the bottom, and these turns are swinging around up in these trees.
Yeah.
You you end up going quite a ways to get out of the way.
Sure.
So
Sure. Huh. And was it, did you guys ever end up bidding against Ernie on jobs, or
no,
was it
no. But
okay?
most of the good loggers, um, they were pretty, you know, free with,
Hmm.
sharing, information on what they're doing
Sure.
and things like that. I remember one time, I don't know whether Pete told me this himself or somebody else told me, but um, they were hung out a long ways with that big burger they had,
Hmm.
and with that thing, you might hang on the same stump for weeks,
Sure.
and he was going to the back end to get ready for a road change or pick out his next tail hold or something. And you use those. I don't know what size they use on that burger, but you use a big knockout shackle,
Hmm.
and somehow the shackle had gotten sideways. You dropped the skyline or something, and it flipped a big whip in it.
Ooh.
Well, it had spread it out, and the round part of the shackle was hung up in the straps, and the other part of it was hung on the end of the skyline. The pin was gone.
Oh my gosh.
And he's going a ladder down.
Oh yeah,
Easy,
easy
easy.
guys, easy.
Yeah, no kidding.
Wow. How in the world could that have happened, huh?
I think he said it was a skookum shackle, and from then on it was all skookum. So,
Wow. All right.
but those guys have done some amazing things. Dahlgrens are maybe the best ever.
Yeah.
They
Yeah, I know the boys I worked with down in Australia and even the ones in New Zealand. I've heard of Dahlgrens and talked about them. So yeah, the word gets around.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They did a lot of it, and they were smart. They it always seemed to me like, with Pat and I, uh, that one of the reasons, we were successful is we just worked harder than everybody else.
Mm,
We just would stay there we had it right. And if you had to work Sunday, that was just Sunday. You didn't.
that's what you had to do.
Yeah, you just
Sure.
had to do it. And it was a matter of pride. Just like when you're logging and it starts snowing, you never want to be the first one that quits. We'd always want to be the last one that quit.
Yeah.
And you go downtown and everybody's saying, "God, we got 2 feet of snow in our landing," and
Yeah.
we're going, "Well, that's funny. We just left ours, and we're higher than you are, and there ain't 2 feet there." So, and our guys were good. We were just up above a lake, above Jefferson Lake the other day, and all those roads up there almost all closed off, grown in or
Sure.
something. But I was telling Jen's family about how we were hauling out of here in the snow, because we had about a month left, and usually out of there, if you weren't out of there by Thanksgiving, you may not be getting out.
Sure. Yeah, you're in
We'd been
trouble.
grading the road, the roads are just solid ice, almost clear to and everybody's chaining up at least some to, one one on each end
Yeah.
anyway, and plowing the roads all the time, and then getting that yarder out of there, with we had chains for it, but it was still, you get that narrow road and 250,000 pounds of weight.
Oh, yeah. Throwing iron on a yarder to get it off the hillside, that doesn't sound like much fun.
No, well, I don't think Bill would have drove it without.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How long did you guys log with the 739 before you sold it?
Oh, I don't know. How long was that? We must have, because I think my last job was that job out at Daybob. I think that was it must have been in about 1990 or something in there. I'm not really sure. Um, I know we had a big party at the end. So we all went to the timber house,
Oh, okay.
and that was it was we had a lot of good people that we worked with, and you know, that's like Dave Newman and some of those guys. They Matt Smith, you know, and Matt went on to really do well.
Sure.
So
So who all did you? Because I've got some photos I come across also of that crew party you mentioned, and on your crew there was Bill, Matt Smith, Joe Duckett, Dave Newman was part of that too.
yeah, and was Kenny Gall there?
Yeah, Kenny
Because
Gall,
Kenny
yeah,
worked for us for quite a while.
and Ken Spencer, is that one of them too?
I'm not sure. I don't remember that name, but you know, we had so many chokerman and stuff. You know, I always felt bad about, you know, somebody come up to you and say, "God, we set chokers for you," you know, and you know, it's kind of like, you know, we always had our normal guys that truck for us, and
Sure,
then we always had a, you know, a fair amount of guys that came up and, you know, just jippoed for us, and
sure.
you know, they come up and talk, and it's kind of like,
You
whoa,
got a revolving door for chokermen, so you kind of forget sometimes.
yeah, that's right,
Sure.
yeah.
Um, uh, man, I wish I could remember his name. Now he just passed on. Was I think a chaser for you too, out of Brinnon there. Holden, Bruce Holden.
Oh, Bruce, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Bruce worked for us pretty early.
Okay.
Yeah,
When
yeah.
did he first start with you all then?
He started, I think we had the 84,
Oh,
you know, and
okay.
he started pretty early. He chased for us for quite a while. Then I think he went to work for Mankeys after that. I'm not sure. But then Bruce had, I think he had a stroke or something when he was, you know, um, because he was, I know Bill used to stop and see him, and he was at a like assisted living place
Yeah,
for quite a while.
yeah.
And that was really tough. I know you wanted to talk a little bit about the Forest Service, you know, and the
Oh, yeah.
relationship of loggers to the Forest Service. And, you know, generally, it was really good. You know, as long as you were working with the experienced guys, you know, with the last hood sport jobs we did, we were working for or working with Bill Gale and Lynn Hunter were the TSO
Okay.
type inspector guys, and just the and in fact, you know, I can say this now because they're both old and retired, but if it hadn't been for them, we wouldn't have got the job for Simpson because they'd been inspectors for Simpson,
Oh, sure.
and Simpson had talked to them about, you know, asked them about us, and they gave us a good recommendation.
That's cool.
And I
Yeah.
mean, it wasn't like they, you know, they didn't enforce their contracts
Sure.
because they were really good. When we were logging that job up above Jefferson Lake, it was all blowdown,
Hmm.
and just terrible blowdown too. The cutters just had a hell of a time on it, but they'd sent a summer crew up to mark bird trees,
Oh,
and they marked all the bird trees right up front, you know, just like, you know, 250, 300 feet
yeah,
from the
sure.
road. And, you know, I mean, there was barely any landings on it. I don't know if you saw the pictures, but we had built this false bunk thing that we put over the hill,
Yeah, I did.
and we used that. And otherwise, we just had to set every log on the truck. There was barely a ditch there. And
Wow.
so, you know, you know, as soon as the cutters got started, you know, we got Lynn and Bill up there, and we said, you know, this
What?
is just not
Yeah.
going to work, you
Yeah.
know.
What's up with this?
Yeah, we don't have a helicopter. So
Uh,
so Lynn and Bill went back and they looked at how it was laid out, and they said, okay, this is how many trees we need, you
okay.
know, just go down and figure out, kind of the size we want and do that and leave them. And so that all went really smooth until one day they used to do a check scale. the Forest Service guys would go
Oh,
over to, because most of this wood we were selling to Portac, because it was all
sure.
pretty good, pretty high grade wood. So it went over there. So they went over there to check scale. Well, I just happened to get there on a day where we changed roads or did something, because there was like 2 loads of logs that they rolled out that all said, "Do not cut bird trees
Oh
on them."
no. Oh
and
yeah.
and they came up there and they said, "You could at least tear the damn sign off them, can't you?"
Yeah. Oh man. Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah. But generally, our relationship, we usually, the Forest Service laid them out so they were doable.
Sure.
And every once in a while, I got one story about one guy that was the worst we ever had. We were logging up Pistol Creek. We were on that same unit we tipped the 84 over
Mm-hmm.
on. And we built a spur road down to this landing to get out a little further, and had this Forest Service guy. And he was just a pain in the ass. Pat was about to kill him, and I don't recall his name, which is just as well. And anyway, so into the job, we get the unit all passed and everything. Well, the road had to be scarified,
Oh yeah.
and so we got this grader guy out of Forks, and I think his last name was Fletcher. And all he did was grade roads. He just had a grader, grade roads for anybody that needed road graded.
Mm-hmm.
He'd been a World War II guy. He was real straightforward. And so we get the road scarified. The Forest Service guy shows up, and the grader operator was still there. And so he says, "Well, I'll walk down with you." And it wasn't a very long spur, maybe a quarter of a mile. So we're walking back up the road, and the Forest Service guy, I finally asked him, I says, "Well, does it look okay?" And he said, "Well," he said, "I think the scarifying is fine, but," he said, I don't like these tire tracks."
Oh.
And the the road grader guy, he says, he said, "I'm pretty damn good on a grader, but," he said, "I can't make it fly." And
Oh gosh.
and that was, and nobody said anything after that, but he
Oh.
did pass it. So, but I thought that was a perfect comment.
Oh gosh, that's good too.
Yeah.
Oh, how long were you guys out on Pistol Creek for?
Oh, I don't think that was a really big job. I think we were out there for maybe 6 months or so.
Okay.
Oh, I do have a good story about that. George Hansberry was chasing for us, and Lonnie Hagman. I don't know if you know Lonnie. He was a trucker out of Shelton.
I know of him, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, he was hauling for us out there, and we were staying at some little cheap motel in Port Angeles. And so George and Lonnie are in the same room, two to a room. And Lonnie's a big, heavy guy, and and George gets up in the morning and he says, "Lonnie, we got." Oh no, no, it was in the middle of the night. George woke Lonnie up and he said, "You got to do something." He says, I can't sleep." He said, "You're snoring so loud. There's no way I'm going to be able to go to sleep. I gotta work in the morning." And
Hmm.
Lonnie rolled over and looked at him and he said, "Well," he said, "the only thing I can tell you is when I'm snoring at home, and I just tell my wife to cuddle up and hold on to my pecker, and I'll quit snoring." And rolled back over and went to sleep. And George came the next day and he says, "I got to get a different room."
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's something else. Um, oh, there was something that was burning a hole in my brain I was going to ask you about. Um, so in the later years before you sold the tower, the big tower, did you have all pretty much the same crew that you started out with, or do you have quite a few guys cycle through and have a different set of guys at the end?
Well, I think we no, I think we had Joe was still there, and I think mostly we were the same guys. Um, you know, I think we always had, and we always really tried to have a core group of guys
Hmm.
that, if you've got a good rigged slinger and a couple good chokermen, that other guy is, because the guys we had, if you weren't doing your job, they didn't have to come to me and say.
You'd run them off. Yeah.
They'd say, "Hey, that's your job. Do it."
Mm-hmm.
And if you weren't going to do it, then you either manned up or moved on.
Sure.
So it was actually pretty easy, and occasionally, you get some guys complaining, but generally, we always had medical insurance for the guys, and we always did a bonus system where, if we needed, 60 loads a week, then if they got that 60 loads, then they got a bonus for it. And we
Sure.
always did it in 2 different checks.
Okay.
We'd give them their however many hours and that stuff in
Mm-hmm.
one check, and then this was their bonus check. So for a lot of the guys, that was their money. That was their
Sure.
money to go fishing with or buy a gun or something like that. It
Sure.
wasn't the household money.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the guys really liked that, and it was good for us. And then, because we'd always put that, we'd bid the job at a hopefully a reasonable production level,
Mm-hmm.
where, if we need 12 loads a day, that's where, you guys can start
Yeah.
picking up some extra money. And those guys worked hard, and if they did complain, there was usually a reason for it.
Yeah.
So
So now, Gary, when you got out of logging, when you sold the big yarder, is that when you jumped right into building up the quarry?
I I was doing some land development then,
Mm-hmm.
and I worked on that for a couple years before I worked on the quarry.
Okay. Yeah. Out of all the guys that you worked with, um, who sticks out the most in your mind that really influenced you a lot in your work career?
I don't know if I could choose one. Like the guys I worked for, I would say hands down Jim Adelman, or not, yeah, Jim Adelman would have been the guy that moved up with that worked with Roger and Dick. He was um, probably the most influential
Hmm.
person that I worked with, or worked for. Um, but I think everybody that that you worked with, and sometimes, especially when I was working out in the West End, you're working with lots of tramps, lots of timber tramps, and those guys that worked for so many outfits and saw it done so many different ways that they knew a lot. They
Mm-hmm.
they were a different group to work for, because like sometimes, you're a rigging slinger and you're 20 years old, and these guys you're setting chokers for, you're like 35, and they know like 10 times as much as you do, but they didn't want to sling rigging. They just show me where my log is,
Yeah.
and that's how they chose to do it.
Hmm.
um, but I think every one of the probably, I think my one of my biggest faults uh, when I was tending hook is I always wanted to do it my way, and a lot of these guys that just like Joe Duckett and guys like that, they did it differently. And you know you find out, if you just keep your mouth shut and let them do it and see how they do it, you might learn something.
Okay.
And and like Matt Smith and Dave Newman and all those guys, they were just good men. You really didn't have to tell them much. And the biggest thing that always concerned me is you get a guy that comes to work for you and he's a good man, but he just always won't take that extra step to get out of the way. He'll always crowd the rig in a little bit too much, and that almost always turns out bad. fortunately, our wood was almost all bucked, so we didn't have to worry
Sure.
about tree length logging. But um, you never know if that cutter, got that one buck clear off. So
Mm-hmm. Sure. And Gary, out of the guys that you've worked with, there's been a lot that have passed through the years, but who would you say the biggest character was? There's got to be I'm sure there's a handful of people that you'd say
oh
fit in that
man, yeah.
category.
Oh yeah, there really there really were a lot of characters and a lot of just like the young guys, they'd come back, like uh, Dave Newman, he was always pretty calm, but like Matt and Mike Love and guys like that, every weekend was a new catastrophe, that
Okay.
you'd have to go through, and that was always entertaining.
I heard a story. I don't remember exactly how this goes, but um, Hansberry was chasing, and the guys out in the rigging called for some reason, your lunch box was on the landing and called for your lunch box to send up a broken pair of glasses, and they had caught a mountain beaver
Yeah,
and stuffed it in there.
yeah, that was on Pistol Creek.
Okay.
Yeah, we were uh, for some reason, I don't know that we couldn't yard and load at the same time or what, but we were out in the brush and it was a nice warm day and we were laying there eating lunch and mountain beaver came up out of a hole, so I just went over and clammed him with, I had those plastic lunch buckets, and just
Sure.
clammed him and I put him in there and I got on there and told Pat Chadwick, I said, I broke my glasses up here and can I send it up there and have George fix it? And then we told Pat what was going on. And George went out there and opened that lunch bucket up and it was just all teeth coming out. And
Oh,
he was falling over backwards. And I think Dan Morger was working for us then.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
Dan was a real good hand too.
the Dan Hook on the 739 side or the
No, I think
84?
he did on the 84 for a while, and then I think his dad passed away, and then he took over his dad's
Okay.
outfit. So,
How long did he work with you guys for?
God, quite a while.
And how about Kenny Gall?
Kenny, he worked for us for several years. Kenny was a good hand, but he had some other problems that kind of got in his way there at the end,
Sure.
and
And
yeah, Kenny was a good hand.
out of all those jobs that you guys did, what would you say the place that had the best view was?
Usually the place with the shittiest weather.
uh,
Well, like that Circle Pass job, that had some beautiful views on it. We're looking right out over Seattle, and
sure.
because we had cell phones up there for years before anybody else did, because we were up high enough we could get a cell signal over to
Oh,
Seattle.
okay.
So I remember Dennis. We were working up at Circle Pass, and it was just a windy, cold mess. And he he took a picture of he had his heated mirrors on.
Hmm.
He's waiting for a load. We didn't have many logs, and the ice is running down and making an icicle, and the icicle ended up going this way. And I told him that was one of the tougher days we ever had, where
Wow.
when the
Yeah.
when the icicles are growing at a
Uh-huh.
45-degree angle.
Wow. Yeah, that's some wind.
Yeah.
Holy smokes. Okay.
Well, actually, we were logging up on Buck Mountain, right on that first big switchback going up Buck Mountain, and Pat and I were up there. I think it was on a weekend, and the cutters were almost done. They were just below the road, and
Hmm.
they got blown out, and the timber started blowing down,
Oh
and
my
we were up there.
gosh.
Where I mean, there wasn't anything behind us.
Sure.
The wind was coming through the pass and down the hill, but the timber started blowing over the fell and bucked. Oh my God, that's a mess. But
Oh, oh, that's horrendous.
yeah, we were working up there on a different job, and I think I think Pat was just up. Yeah, Pat was just up there with his with the 739, I think, and it got really snowy and icy, and we tried to get through the whole day, but couldn't give up. And my dad came down, and he was chained up, and that Buck Mountain road's pretty steep,
Mm-hmm.
and he just started sliding,
Oh no.
and so the truck stopped, and because Pat and I were behind him, and we just said, just leave it there, just leave it there. We can get by you, and we took Dad home. He was living down at the Duckabush, and there was a bunch of wrecks on Mount Walker, cars coming
Wow.
up the hill. And I think it took 2 or 3 days for it to thaw out enough where we could go up and get his truck out of
Oh
there.
wow.
And he wasn't one to leave that truck up there,
Wow. Okay.
So, um, but that was pretty scary.
What kind of advice would you give a young person that wanted to get into logging these days?
Well, I don't know that the jobs are different now, and you're working at a lower elevation, so you're not going to lose much time. But you better, these boys that go at this now, you're up at 2 or 3 in the morning, and you get home at 6 or 7 at night. It's long days. I don't know. I mean, if you know probably half the guys that log, or maybe more, just like because where they're working rather than what they're doing. Like we'd get up in the morning, go up the mountains, and the sun's coming up over the Cascades, and
Mm-hmm.
you know most days you see stuff that nobody else ever gets to see. By the time deer season comes, you've got them all named. So
Sure. Yeah. Sure. And out of all the different jobs that you've done out in the woods, what do you think the most fun one would have been?
oh, the best one's tendon hook, no doubt. I mean, it's good. Slinging rigging is fun because if you got a good crew,
Mm.
you can have a lot of fun with the guys you got. Um, but just keep your mind active and everything. Probably tendon hook is probably the best job.
And there's some people that watch these interviews that they're familiar maybe with the terms, but don't know what all goes into the job itself. But explain a little bit what that actually means, the 10 hook.
Well, when you first start, tendon hook means like you take the strap off the block and you move it to the next stump, and about 50, 60 feet away, and then you're a hook tender. And then then after you got to figure out all your issues you've got to tie down, and when that one fails, you better have another answer and be ready for it. And that's the thing that taught me the most is that when you get that road change made, you better have a stand-up plan for
Mm-hmm.
what's going to happen if this fails. So
You're the logistics guy that keeps the wood flowing.
yeah, yeah, and you don't want to. It doesn't do you any good to bury the landing and not be able to cause him a lot of heartache. So, but and keeping the crew, if you got the rigging in the air and everything's going smooth, the rigging crew's happy. So, setting choker's a pretty easy job
Mm-hmm.
if your choker comes back and it's just in the air, and you grab it and go set your choker and get out of the way in a safe place.
Yeah, sure. Before I forget, when you guys showed up to Stampede Pass that one morning and the landing was on fire, what did you guys have to do to get everything reeled in to keep equipment from getting damaged?
Well, that day I wasn't there. I went somewhere to pick up some line or do something.
Mm.
So I didn't get there right that morning. So Pat and Dennis and all those guys had to deal with all that.
Mm.
So I whatever they did, it sure worked.
But you guys pulled off that job at that point and then
Well,
went
we pulled
somewhere
out of
else?
that unit.
Sure.
Yeah. And I think that unit was almost done.
Okay.
So uh, but yeah, that was and nobody really ever figured out what, if we had a local contractor that wasn't happy with
Hmm.
us taking that job, or some guys thought that maybe those big powerful Bonneville lines that run through there, if they could have, you know, sucked enough energy into that skyline
Hmm.
to start it
Sure.
or what. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Don't
Okay.
know. So, but it was pretty pretty treacherous.
Sure.
And we had we one thing I got to say is we had probably some of the best truckers that you ever could have had too. We had you know Dennis and Dad and Ron Hartley and a lot of those boys that were just there every day,
Yeah.
Junior Winters and
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard a lot of stories about those guys over the years, and they it, and they all sounded like they really stood by their logger, um, and almost like you guys were family. I mean, well, of course for your dad, yeah, but for Dennis, like it was more than just a place to work. Like he was really tied in with you guys.
yeah, yeah, and they were a big help to us too. If you needed like sometimes pulling those Lorraines or like that 739 with a trailer mount, getting it up the hill, they'd hook onto it, with an empty truck
And give a tug,
and
yeah.
help it up the hill, and stuff like that. And that's a big deal, so uh, they were always willing to stop and pick something up for us if we needed it
Sure.
or anything else. So I think, they got treated good, but we got treated good too.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah. Well, Gary, I really appreciate you giving me some of your time today, and I'm gonna let you get back to your afternoon.
well, I really think this is important to, the interesting thing about me is, I haven't thought about a lot of this stuff for a long time. And I've kind of gotten on Facebook with some of Dennis's stuff, and
Sure.
there's been some really good stuff on there that, a lot of, my dad rolled a truck over, it would have been that 65 Kenworth he had working for Buck Mountain. And I put a picture on there, and they were talking about Buck Mountain. And so I put a picture of Dad's wrecked truck. Well, Louis Lee, who is a timber cutter from out around Forks,
Hmm.
he was actually running the machine that loaded the load.
Oh, wow.
And so just to contact those people,
Yeah.
is a nice thing.
Gosh, that's
So
cool. Yeah. With the with the Facebook and all those groups on there, it's brought up a whole new way to keep in touch with people and see these different things that otherwise you wouldn't know about or hear about. So,
yeah, I don't know if you saw um, Walt Kelly's granddaughter posted some pictures of Walt's
yeah.
outfit the other day, and that was some pictures I'd seen the one of the new yellow and black truck,
Yeah.
but I hadn't seen those other photos.
Yeah, she was meaning to. We were gonna get together sometime and go over um, her pictures
Yeah,
and digitize them and all that, but haven't had a chance to get together yet. So,
right, right, yeah,
but yeah, one of these days. Because yeah, I'm glad that you had a lot of that history from the Kelly side of the family and some of that from down there in the Brinnon area. Because there's not too many people around anymore that
right,
know about it or have even heard of it. So
right, right,
yeah,
yeah.
that's all good stuff.
It is good stuff, and thank you.
Yeah, you betcha. Well, you have a good day.
You too.